So thank you very much, TX, for talking to me today. And what I'd like to do first is ask you to introduce yourself to the students and tell us about what you do now and how your career led you to this point.
Okay, TX Thomas. I'm a distinguished research fellow at the National Defense University. In this context, distinguished means old. Um, so I joined the Marine Corps in 1975 and chose to become an infantry officer. And at the basic school, all of my instructors were Vietnam veterans. And they were obviously frustrated that a small country like Vietnam had defeated the United States. So I got interested in how did this happen and started to read about insurgency. That's pretty difficult at the time. There were no military history books in stores at that time. The United States had gone anti-military, so you had to do a couple things. You went to used Burke stores and you watched obituary pages. Because when an old colonel or general died, you'd go visit his house for the books in their libraries. Then I continued in the infantry field. I got a secondary in intelligence. At a break after having had company command, I got an opportunity to go to the Mershon Center for Strategic Studies at Ohio State and spend a year focused on insurgency. That led to a job with the Central Intelligence Agency. I was seconded and essentially worked training insurgents in various parts of the world for about 3 years. Then back to the Marine Corps, another level of school, year in command of an intelligence battalion, then back to 1st Marine Division where I did a tour in Somalia early on, the first 5 months when we were initially getting control of the city and the country. Then I went to Canadian National Defense College. I was a member of class last of the course at Kingston. I'm not sure I was personally responsible for it, but it did close less than an hour after I graduated. I came back, commanded an infantry battalion, went off commanded chemical, biological, and incident response force. So after the 9/11, I was part of the cleanup on Capitol Hill. Very interesting experience. My last 2 years, I was a senior research fellow or a military research fellow at the same place I am now at National Defense University. During that period, I went to Iraq and helped set up the Iraqi army. Then I retired. I decided I wanted to do think tank work. To do that, you've got to have a PhD. It's kind of a union card for that kind of work. So I went and got my PhD at Oxford, came back, and was lucky enough to get a job at NDU. And that brings me to where we are today.
Fascinating and very interesting career. As part of this, of course, you wrote a book, The Sling and the Stone on War in the 21st Century, in which you explained the approach to modern warfare that has become known as fourth generation warfare. Can you provide the students with an introduction to that and why it's important today?
Yeah, it really came out of some work by Bill Lynn, G.I. Wilson, and a couple other authors who in 1989 wrote the first piece on what is fourth generation warfare. And they challenged other Marine Gazette readers to define it. So during my year at Canadian National Defense College, that was my personal research project. And I came to somewhat of a disagreement with their version. They were a little too much of the history being driven by just the technology, and I'm more that history is driven by political, social, and economic trends that allow you to use the technology. And so the four generations is a very simplified version of history. It only starts with modern war, only goes that far. But it was necessary because at the time, you literally could not talk about insurgency in the United States. The general position of the Department of Defense is we don't do insurgency. We lost Vietnam. We got out of that. We're never going to do it again. We will simply refuse to do insurgency. I disagreed and thought insurgency wasn't through with us. So while they won't publish if you write about insurgency, if you write about something new, i.e. fourth generation warfare, they'll publish it, even if you subsequently identify fourth generation warfare as evolved insurgency. And this is where Bill Lynn and I have split. He does not see it as involved insurgency. He sees it as a cross-cultural struggle. So there is no unified concept of fourth generation warfare. I use it primarily as a way to get in the argument, because remember in the 1990s in the United States, what had happened in 1991, we ran a very successful conventional campaign in Desert Storm. And we then said, okay, high tech is the way of the future. All war will be high tech. We started with network-centric warfare, where you'll know all, see all, understand all, and therefore you'll dominate the enemy. I thought this was very, very dangerous. I'm more believe Clausewitz had it right when he said fog and friction are an inherent part of war. I don't see how just by seeing the battlefield you'll understand it. I've been married for 40 years, and I see what happens in my house. A lot of days I don't know what the hell is going on. So why would a battlefield be any different? And sure enough, that's what happened when we went to Iraq and Afghanistan. And the reason I wrote the book, I wrote it in 2003, because I could see we were triumphant over the win, the quote win in Afghanistan and the win in Iraq, and we were totally ignoring what comes next. So I wrote the book to say this is where I think warfare is going. You'll notice it's more oriented. In fact, I'd not even done a chapter on how we should respond to it. I'd only traced insurgencies. And the publisher said, I want a couple chapters on what to do about it. So mostly it's a book about insurgency and how insurgency evolved and how warfare evolves and continues to evolve.
Interesting. And you mentioned net-centric warfare. I mean, is there, for the students who are watching this is something that they're not really familiar with. Would you be able to give them a quick description of what the term means?
Yeah, Admiral Owens was the vice chairman at the time, and he was a big proponent. And essentially the idea was the entire battlefield would be networked together. And Admiral Zabrowski developed the concept and said, look, you will see everything that happens on the battlefield, and you will react so fast you will lock out other options. And you will make it impossible for the enemy to do anything but be targeted and hit. And that was the first time I really entered a debate. I wrote an article called War is Not a Rational Business, because they were using a business model. How if you use a business model, Microsoft locked out IBM, etc. They made it cheaper, faster, funnier. They locked them out. I said the difference is if this was warfare, when it first started, IBM would have hired some guys from the mafia and said, hunt down everybody in a garage across the country that's working on computers, kill them, burn down the garage, wipe out their family, burn down the house, put out the word that if you work on this stuff, you're dead. Had they done that, I don't think Microsoft would have evolved. And that's the difference. Warfare is not played by the same rules as business. If you think you're going to use a business model, you're deluding yourself. Because the other problem is there's a reason man's at the top of the food chain. We are devious and lethal. And anything you figure out, there's another guy figuring out a way to beat it.
Okay, and so you're known for in the past having been critical of the Pentagon and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. How would you describe the approach that's being adopted today? To what extent does it fit with a fourth generation approach or a net-centric approach or perhaps something different?
Yeah, this is a huge discussion right now. We've got a number of problems. The defense budget's going down. Costs are way high because of personnel and the new generation of equipment is extraordinarily expensive. So the question is, how do we fight? Well, before that, you really got to ask the question of who and why would you fight? The Air Force and the Navy want to focus on China as the next big enemy. And China's got this anti-access aerial denial approach they consider an anti-interference. We put the umbrella of weapon systems out so the U.S. Navy can't approach China's shore. And China returns to its rightful position as the hegemon of Asia. Now remember, China doesn't see itself as rising, it sees itself as returning to its rightful place. So that's one end. The other end is people who believe, well, it'll probably be insurgency, small scale, etc. There's also the problem of the super-empowered individual is rising, and this is the guy or gal who uses off-the-shelf technology in support of a cause, we may not understand the cause, and strikes. And this would be, I think maybe the first one of these was the anthrax attack on Capitol Hill. Dr. Ivins, we believe, did it. We don't know. He committed suicide before we were sure. But apparently he used off-the-shelf Ames strain anthrax, used some kind of a commercial grinder, potentially a grinder from makeup, because women's makeup powder is some of the finest in the world. And if you ground up the spores, it makes it incredibly difficult to deal with and to find and kill. And he used it on Capitol Hill. So here's one individual decided he would take on the Congress of the United States. I think that's pretty interesting. So that's a trend. Then you look at the bombing in London, the bombing in Madrid, and you see small groups can do things. If you extrapolate that a bit and you look at what Timothy McVeigh did in Oklahoma City, that was a single truckload of ammonium nitrate, took down half a building. In 1947, 2,000 tons of ammonium nitrate blew up when a ship caught on fire. Ammonium nitrate is just fertilizer. It's nothing fancy. It's standard fertilizer. When that blew up, it looked like Hiroshima had happened. It was a 2-kiloton blast. We now ship these things in quantities of 20 kilotons, or about 1.5 times the size of Hiroshima. If that is what you're doing, then an individual or very small group could set off a nuclear equivalent explosion in most ports in the world by planning for, observing, and taking an ammonium nitrate chip. The next ugly thing is, of course, synthetic biology. We're now creating life forms. We're building life forms with up to 1 million base pairs. There are only 200,000 base pairs in smallpox. We know what the formula is. It's on the internet, the genetic code. So the question always is, well, bioweapons are very hard to weaponize. That's if you think like a nation. If you say like a terrorist and say, I'll simply create the virus, and both my dissemination and incubation will be people. I'll inject 20 volunteers and distribute them across the world, so there's a worldwide simultaneous outbreak of smallpox. So there are things like that. So what you've got to look at from the military point of view is everything from a near-peer competitor, China, to the super-empowered individual, and how do you cover that spectrum with a smaller budget, a smaller force, and much more expensive weapons? So that's one of the trends. The other huge technological trend is the convergence of robotics, information, and energy, both explosive energy and usable energy. Cheap drones, I mean, probably on the campus today, they've got people flying drones around, either quadcopters or drones. Frat houses now have air forces. I'm sure there's no problems being created by that on campus. But if you realize that a frat house with an air force, you just put an explosive device in the nose and you have a precision weapon. If you give it GPS guidance, then it's precision long-range weapon. If you give it some type of inertial guidance that gets it to the local vicinity and an optical recognition chip that picks out a particular building and can fly into that building, you've now got a long-range precision weapon that's probably not jammable because it's operating in the optical spectrum when it gets in vicinity of the target. Because you can 3D print these things, they're going to be cheap too. So again, down at the insurgency end, super-empowered small group end, we could see swarms of really cheap, both short-range and long-range drones. And drones don't carry much in the way of ordnance if they're cheap. But you only need a couple ounces of explosive to detonate a pile of ammonium nitrate, to release a tank load of fluorine or phosgene. You know, if you hit the tank with a shaped charge, you get a rupture. So there's lots of different things you can do that can be fairly disruptive and work, obviously, well at the fourth generation end of warfare.
So does information technology have a role in your view today in modern warfare? So in a fourth generation approach, would you utilize information technology?
Yeah, in quite a number of ways. Of course, the first thing is, since you're trying to directly defeat the enemy decision maker, you're trying to get the message through to them that whatever they're doing, they've got to stop because they can't succeed. So obviously, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, all of these things are ways to get your message out, to keep hammering home that you're not succeeding, we are. Okay, so that's one form of information technology. Another form, of course, is the actual computer network attack. A denial of service attack, a defacing attack. Those have been fairly minor and fairly annoying. So far, we haven't seen non-state characters that can really do a lot of that stuff, despite all the people saying, oh, this is going to happen soon. And it may well. I don't know enough about cyber to say one way or another. A lot of people are worried it would be a way for them to strike back. For instance, you do something in Syria, they shut down a power plant in Canada in the middle of the winter, create some problems. So that type of information technology. Mm-hmm. The real concern for me on information technology is the growing ability to put really smart capabilities in really small, lightweight drone systems, either ground-based or air. You've got college students who are programming drones with their cell phone to fly a pre-planned path. So once it departs, it's flying on its own, and you can't hit that guy. Well, if it knows, if I'm an insurgent and I know that all I want to hunt for is tanks, because the only person out there who owns tanks is the other side, or mobile protected weapon systems, the MRAPs, I can go after those. If I'm a really nasty guy, I can go after fuel tankers. Fuel trucks always move in and out of cities. Suppose my first drone gets the shot, gets the rupture, gets the fuel spreaded, and my second drone ignites it. There's all kinds of things like this you can do that'll be ugly, and these are all parts of information. It's right at the end of World War I, we had a whole bunch of technologies developing. We had radio technology, we had radar, we had metallurgy, we had internal combustion engine. We're getting improvements in bombing and fuses. We didn't know how all that would come together. Nobody in the 1920s really predicted this. There were some early predictions with disagreements, but what came out was this air-ground armored force that became Blitzkrieg. It was the convergence of technologies that made this possible, not any single technology. Well, now we're seeing nanotechnology, biotechnology, information technology, robotics, and energetics all coming together that are going to create things that we really don't envision. I think we're getting the first dim visions of that in terms of autonomous swarming. But on the other hand, if countries can very quickly develop energy weapons, directed energy, not so much laser, but more probably microwave, then maybe we can knock these drones down. Well, then do they get into photo mapping an area and getting the drones down so they're low and aren't within visual range until the last minute? All of those things are potential and coming.
Yeah. So when you talk about drones, this is an area I wanted to look at a little bit more in the sense that the use of drones by the military at the moment is something that it causes some controversy on a fairly wide scale in the areas where they're used at the moment. So as far as fourth generation warfare is concerned, how would you comment on that?
Well, on the government side, I mean, one of the approaches you can use for counter-terror is what the Israelis call mowing the grass. Ideally, you would create a political solution that made everybody happy and peace would reign. The problem is with a Salafist, there's really no central position. So the best you can do is what the Israelis call mowing the grass. They kill enough of them to keep them disorganized. You try to take out their leadership, and drones are a really relatively easy way to do that. They create problems, they can create local problems, but they do answer the question of mowing the grass. That's for the government side. What I'm concerned about is the other side starts to say, hey, if they can do that to us, and if Amazon can use drones to deliver packages, why can't I use drones to deliver explosives to their doorstep? For instance, we've hardened our bases really well against vehicle-borne IEDs, right? Suppose it's a quadcopter-borne IED. And suppose the target is not an individual, but an airplane or an ammunition complex or a fuel complex or at a command post. All of those are coming fairly quickly. If you use YouTube much, you see there are a couple college kids are experimenting dropping high explosives. There's the guy who's trying to take a $26 drone and make it autonomous. And he seems to be getting there. Mm-hmm. Again, how do you define autonomous? But again, I don't need a lot of autonomy out of my drone. I need it. You're going to fly this direction at a very low altitude, just enough to get over obstacles for this far, and then you'll be inside the airbase. Then shift to optical and look around and find, in priority order, big airplane, little airplane, whatever you want, and fly into it. That's going to be an interesting challenge.
Absolutely. So the role of the soldier, the ordinary member of the military, how does that change in fourth generation warfare? And if so, does this mean that their training and perhaps the people selected are going to change as part of this?
I think what we've probably finally learned in the U.S. is that direct and large counterinsurgency isn't going to work. Or you as an outside power go in and try to run the counterinsurgency yourself. You do the fighting, you do the governing, like we tried to do in Vietnam, in Afghanistan, and Iraq. That doesn't work. We started to get a handle on Iraq when we got the locals stood up and we moved more into an advise and assist role. Even then, of course, it didn't solve the underlying political problems, which is why they've still got violence there today. So I think what you look at if you're a Western power is how do I advise and assist correctly? Because perversely, you get more influence over political change if you stay small. When you go big into Vietnam, or you go big into Iraq or Afghanistan and say, okay, if you don't change politically, I'm leaving. They go, no, you're not. You got 120,000 guys here. It'll take you 2.5 years to get out of here. Plus your prestige is on the line. So I don't have to change. Mm-hmm. When we were in El Salvador and we had 55 advisors and the ambassador couldn't get a decision he needed, he'd say, okay, I'm not going to mess with your system. It's your country. You run it the way you want, but we're not participating in a losing effort. So my guys are leaving this afternoon. With 55 guys, he can call on a telephone and say, get them all back. One time he actually did that. They were coming back in from the field. An airplane had been launched from the United States to pick them up, and he was taking it out of the country that afternoon. And so the El Salvadoran government got together and said, yeah, we better make this change. That allowed them to address the underlying political issues. Now, did it create a perfect El Salvador? No. It's not in the power of an outside power to create a perfect society or even a democratic representative society for someone else. But it achieved our strategic goals. And that's what, if you think small and indirect, and the focus is on your strategic goals, not creating an ideal society. Because the other thing we forget is that democracy evolved in Europe over a period of between 400 and 600 years, depending upon the nation. From the Magna Carta, for the first Declaration of Rights, to the Glorious Revolution, where they finally get control of the king, and the parliament actually has control of the king, is 473 years. It takes a little while.
Yep.
We suddenly think we can do it in Afghanistan in a matter of 5 or 10. So I think we got to get over that delusion. One other thing I would advise very strongly, and this sounds like kind of a joke at first, but the first rule of all warfare is leave mountain people alone. Chechens, Afghans, Kurds, Basque, Montagnards, West Virginians, Scots, doesn't matter. They're in the mountains. Yep. They want to be there. Yep. They don't want your society. So if you remember that rule and then go direct and small, you build a different force, a more mature force of people who are advisors rather than fighters, who can begin to use technology. I mean, some of the things are going to be extraordinarily helpful. The nanomaterials are going to make extraordinarily lightweight body armor. Mm-hmm. We may actually get to the shark skin suit. They've already got it. You slide it on. It's the weight of a T-shirt, but it'll stop a knife. Mm-hmm. When we get to the point where it stops bullets, then that makes our guys a lot more survivable in the environment. We're working on exoskeletons, which is just a thing you strap on. We got to solve the energy problem. We'll get to that. All of these will come, but what they should be focused on is enhancing the human, not replacing the human except in very dangerous environments. It's going to be just like in free play chess, where a computer plus a chess master beats either a chess master or a computer. And they've done this a lot of times, and it does it pretty severely. Each does what it does best. And that's the teaming that I think in fourth generation would be extraordinarily useful. In high-tech warfare, you're going to see more of one airplane will fly and there'll be a swarm of drones out front that they'll control and use. It may not even be a high-performance aircraft where the humans are. It may be some kind of low performance that just takes hundreds of miles away. There may be default positions. So there will be environments where it's machines fighting machines. And machines will dominate because of speed, G-forces, everything like that. And that'll probably either be air and I think somewhat undersea. There will be blue water fights will be primarily machine versus machine. There will probably be manned machines because it's very hard to keep a ship at sea. And then as you move into the littorals and on land, now you've got a mix of men and machines. And that's where the people have to be dominant because the environment gets so complex that robots will simply be overwhelmed.
Okay, so you've also mentioned, I heard you mention in another interview, I think, that the NGOs, non-governmental organizations, might have a role in fourth generation warfare in supporting the work of the government and the military together. So could you explain what this is and how it would work?
Well, I think the first thing is the NGOs are there not to support the government or to help us, but to take care of the people. That's crucial, and they're extremely good at it, frankly. When we were in Somalia, I was tasked by the CG, I was the plans officer, and he said, set up 35 feed sites. Each feed site will deliver 2 tons of dry grain per day in quantities no larger than 2 pounds, 1 kilogram. You know, in the military, we're thinking about that. Where do I get 2-pound bags? Who fills the bags? Who seals them? All this sort of thing. You can see this being huge. I didn't know, so I went to the NGOs. I said, you guys do this. They said, well, that's not a problem at all. Well, we can't figure out it's the security. I said, security's easy. I do security. So the deal was I did security. They loaded the trucks with 2 tons of grain. We would drive up to the feed site. They put a big piece of sterile plastic on the ground, cut open the bags, and dump them. You came up, and they had given about 1 kilogram containers of plastic cut out of old milk cartons and stuff, bowls. You scoop in, you get it, you turn, and you dump it in whatever container the person brought. 2 tons of grain distributed in 2-pound increments in less than an hour.
Yep.
6 days a week. Couldn't have done it without the NGOs. Didn't even know how to do it. So they will do things you can't. Other times, it's a teamwork. They'll go, look, we know, for instance, that the road is out between this point and that point. We don't know because we're not out there. They do, but they can't do anything about it. Well, we can come out and repair it. So it's that kind of teamwork that can make them really important in the lower end, more humanitarian. When you get in a mess like Afghanistan, one of the problems NGOs have to understand is that they pride themselves on neutrality. The fact of the matter is, in an insurgency, you are not neutral. If you're providing resources in the insurgent-controlled area, you're supporting the insurgent. If you're providing resources in a government-controlled area, you're supporting the government, because this is a competition for governance. And either side doesn't have to do that if you're doing it for them. This is the hardest point. NGOs really believe they're neutral. The bad guys don't see it that way. The good guys don't see it that way, no matter which side you're on.
Yeah.
The good or bad guys are.
Yep.
So they're a key element. We've got to figure out how to work with them. They provide enormous skills and dedication. We've just got to work together to figure out how to do it.
Interesting. You've also commented on the use of contractors in conflict zones. Can you tell me what you feel about that?
Yeah, I think they're going to be used in all future conflicts. So I think you've got to think through where you want them. I would want them in doing measurable, repeated bureaucratic tasks to free up a soldier or Marine. For instance, port arrival, you know, the stevedore operations. You don't need a soldier to do that, or a Marine. You need one to track the stuff as it comes off. Everything's moved by contractor. The training bases in Kuwait before you moved into Iraq, those were ideal for hiring retired military who would stay there for 4 or 5 years and take care of it. After the war, you put equipment in storage. That's a great job for contractors. Where you get in trouble is you move into the conflict zone, and now you've got another player. And the Iraqis I worked with knew there was little possibility that if a U.S. soldier shot at them, they could get resolution, but there was a chance, particularly later in the war when they developed a relationship with unit commanders. They felt that if a contractor shot them, there would be no recourse ever. Because one of the problems, of course, is who was it? I was working with the Iraqi Army. We didn't have access to U.S. military trucks or security, so we had this beat-up pickup truck, and we'd go out in civilian clothes and just try to blend. Our safety was in blending, not in being a hard target. That meant that the contractors out there saw us as Iraqis, would run us off the road, weapons come up, point in the window, etc. As an active duty colonel, there was nothing I could do about these people. I couldn't identify. It was guys with big muscles wearing Oakley sunglasses and automatic weapons. So I thought that was bad. The other problem I noticed is the quality control was extraordinarily variant, from very highly professional people to guys who were clearly using steroids and drinking alcohol. What could possibly go wrong with adrenaline, steroids, and alcohol in the same day? So they don't belong inside the combat zone. If you're going to use them inside the combat zone, keep them inside your compound. If possible, hire locals. Now, there are going to be places where you have to let them outside the compound. For instance, I do not think we could get our supplies in from Pakistan without the Afghan trucking companies, because they have the combination of the local knowledge, who to bribe, who to fight, who you can fight, who you can't fight, to get the trucking convoys through. I think if we turn it over to military, we simply wouldn't get through. So if you're going to fight on the wrong side of the Hindu Kush, you're going to use contractors. You may find yourself in positions like that, and something you've got to think through before you get involved. Although that's not the general process. We usually jump first and then think about where we're going.
So we are also hearing now about something called fifth generation warfare. Can you explain what that is, and have you got any views on it?
Yeah, I wrote a piece for that for Command and Staff College Journal because they were interested in it. I said, look, there's no agreed definition even of fourth, so going to fifth's a little questionable. But if you really see it's an evolution about who's fighting and why they're fighting. If fourth is insurgents, then fifth becomes a super-empowered individual or small group. And that brings a very different problem because they're fighting for a cause that you may or may not understand. They may never tell anybody. And remember, small groups, I don't remember if you remember the purple tennis shoe people from San Diego. Mm-hmm. It was a religious group that was going to catch the comet. To catch the comet, you had to wear purple tennis shoes.
Yep.
And they all decided to commit suicide together to catch the comet. Suppose they decided they had to kill 500 people to catch the comet. Mm-hmm. Those are the types that will erupt that you don't know about. And, of course, the problem is the destructive power that's available in society is rather significant. Either a Bhopal-type incident where they had the accident at the Bhopal chemical plant in India that killed 20,000 people the first night, left 200,000 with long-term injuries, the Timothy McVeigh-type attack at Oklahoma City, or something larger. All of those are possibilities. The good news for the military is that's not our problem. That's a police problem and an intelligence problem. You know, a small group of nuts, you could stop those guys. All you have to know is where they are. Timothy McVeigh and his team could have been stopped by 2 patrolmen had they known they were there. So that's an intelligence problem. The military would get involved in the immediate response and recovery. Not a great deal of that because civil society has a great deal more of dump trucks, repairs, medical, etc. What they don't have is people who can work in a contaminated environment. So that might be the niche role for a military in backing up that. So again, this is this whole spectrum. What is it our job to do if you're in the military? And then, of course, if you're in homeland security or something, what's the spectrum of things you want to do or should be doing?
Interesting. And I mean, I could have continued talking about many of the points that we've talked about already this afternoon and just continued on those single points for a while. But we're now coming towards the end of the interview, and I've got a final question for you, which is that the students will be watching the video. A lot of them will graduate soon and either move on with their working lives or pursue further study of some kind. Have you any words of advice for them based on your experience of your career?
Yeah, my dad told me that whatever you choose to do in life, you better enjoy it because you're going to spend more of your waking life doing work than anything else. Mm-hmm. And so, again, my son is a struggling author, so he's not making a lot of money, but it's what he wants to do. He enjoys it. I went in the Marine Corps. When I was in the Marine Corps, if you wanted to be a general, you had to do tours at headquarters and things like that. I didn't want to do that. And I thought there wasn't a big enough chance of being a general, so do what you enjoy, and then when that's over, you've got to have a plan for what you do next. But mostly, find something you really enjoy. So when you get up in the morning, you go, I get to go to work today. And I'm like, oh, God, I got to go to work again.
Sounds like good advice to me. And can I say thank you very much, TX, for taking the time to talk to the students today. Your experience and knowledge, particularly around fourth generation warfare, is very valuable to them, and I think will help them as they move into whatever area they choose to go into. So thank you very much for doing this today.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Me too.